Hey students, I hope you're doing well today. We're working through our daily reading plan, and this week it's going to change a little bit. We're reading through some of the Psalms. So I'm reading Psalm 3, and then we'll think about it for a minute. So let's read Psalm 3. A psalm of David when he fled from Absalom his son. O Lord, how many are my foes? Many are rising against me. Many are saying of my soul, there is no salvation for him in God. But you, O Lord, are a shield about me, my glory and the lifter of my head. I cried aloud to the Lord, and he answered me from his holy hill. I lay down and slept. I woke again, for the Lord sustained me. I will not be afraid of many thousands of people who have set themselves against me all around. Arise, O Lord, save me, O my God, for you strike all my enemies on the cheek, and you break the teeth of the wicked. Salvation belongs to the Lord, and blessing be on your people. One of the cool things about poetry is it uses a lot of imagery to evoke in us a response. So I want to focus a little bit on the imagery that we see in this psalm. In verses 1 and 2, we see, O Lord, how many are my foes? Many are rising against me. I imagine David sitting with his group of guys, his military army or troop, with a host or a sea of people around him. I think of Aragorn sitting at the Black Gates and a host of orcs surrounding them. David feels like he is in the midst of a sea of armies with enemies rising up against him. But David has something good in verse 3. But you, O Lord, are a shield about me. Not just a shield in the front, because a shield in the front's not going to do great with an enemy behind you or enemies to the side, like when there's a sea of enemies around you. But he is a shield all about David, on the front and the back and the left and the right. When an enemy comes at him from the right side with an axe, he has a shield. When he gets shot at with an arrow from behind, he has a shield. The Lord is a shield about him. We also see in verse 5 that in the midst of these troubles, David lay down and slept. Again, the imagery is beautiful. You can imagine David laying down and sleeping in the midst of a battle. There's enemies flitting back and forth between the shadows of the trees at night, and you can barely see them in the firelight that surrounds your camp. But you can't move, or you may get slain by some of the enemy. However, in the midst of these troubling and chaotic times, David is able to lay down and sleep. He was able to wake again, for the Lord sustained him. In the midst of a flood of enemies, David slept. Finally, he says, Arise, O Lord, save me, O my God, for you strike all my enemies on the cheek and break the teeth of the wicked. Do you remember what the enemies said about David and his God back in verse 1? Back in verse 2, the enemies said, there is no salvation for David in God. Their mouths were offending God. They were speaking lies against him. So what does the Lord do in verse 7? What does David cry out that he would do? You strike all my enemies on the cheek, and you break the teeth of the wicked. Those who are screaming against David and saying David's God cannot save, those are the ones whose teeth get smashed in. Again, beautiful imagery. You can imagine someone in a boxing match knocking out the tooth of someone else. Well, God's hand is like the heavy hand of a boxer who knocks out the teeth of his enemies. All of this goes to show that David can trust in the Lord and does trust in the Lord because salvation comes from the Lord and salvation belongs to the Lord. It's all summed up in verse 8. Salvation belongs to the Lord. Your blessing be on your people. David is in the midst of a sea of enemies. He cries out to the Lord, and the Lord answers him. And the Lord answers because salvation belongs to the Lord. Guys, girls, I hope you're doing well. I hope you know that in the midst of a sea of enemies, you have a God that can save. You have a God, and salvation belongs to him. He can give us blessings in the midst of this time. Enjoy your week. Have a great week. and I'll see you guys soon, hopefully. God bless.